Have you ever been so down bad that you would risk death on multiple different occasions just so that Senpai would notice you? On an unrelated note, meet Cassie. We've been invited to an abandoned mall, and knowing what happens to little girls in abandoned malls, we've got to meet Gregory and get out of here as quickly as possible. Starting the game, we immediately go into our first trick. You see, this game's speedrun is being done using in-game time. This essentially means that any time spent in the pause menu, loading screens, or main menu doesn't count towards your final time. This decision was made so that 2-year-olds running this game on their nan's microwave don't have to worry about whether or not load times will stop them from being competitive. Exploiting this fact, we can make sure that we're moving down the ladder by the time of the game's first autosave. This will allow us to exit out and reload the save, and because the game doesn't like spawning you in on ladders, it will drop us down to the bottom, skipping the cutscene that would normally play once you reach the floor. From here, we make our way through the entrance hall and find a walkie-talkie with Gregory barking orders at us from the other side. So dreamy. Then we climb this ladder using 2 forward keys to move up it twice as fast because game design. From here is where we'd normally be sus, fall into the kitchen, get jump scared, and grab the Faz wrench. But I'm of the opinion that Among Us jokes are dumb and cringe. So instead, we're gonna have to find another way around. Luckily, we can implement the next trick of the run here, called a wedge jump. Like the name implies, this is a trick in which finding a wedge in the terrain allows you to very jittily ascend it by mashing the forward key and spacebar. And before you ask, yes, I have broken the keyboard doing this. Getting on top of the toolbox, we do some parkour and phase through the wall before simply walking across the roof of the next section, dropping down the middle of the staircase, and running down the maintenance tunnels where we get jump scared by Monty and wake up in Gator Golf. Then we do another wedge jump to skip a small crouching section and take a mask. From here is where we'll find a common theme in this game. A lot of areas that we need to get to are quite commonly just to the side or just above the area that we start off a section in. In this section in particular, the area where we do our first child node puzzle and meet the entity for the very first time is actually directly above this tunnel. That means that if we could somehow find a way to get up high enough, then we could skip both the entire walk through Gator Golf and a few cutscenes. Luckily for us, the fact that we've picked up the mask now gives us access to a whole host of additional tricks we can use to get to where we want to go. The one that we're going to use here is called a mask warp. By using a wedge jump and parkouring our way across the walls, we can get ourselves directly underneath the next area. From here, we can simply put on the mask and it will pop us right up the top. This works because when using the mask, the game will actively try to nudge you towards an area that's in bounds. Hitting the checkpoint and reloading, we can get on top of this wall and jump down to mask warp back in bounds. We're then going to make use of another mask-based trick called mask climbing. Mask climbing is essentially a crossbreed between mask warping and wedge jumping, allowing us to spam the mask in certain areas to gain small amounts of height each time it's taken on or off. Using this to get up here, we run across the roof, mask warp back in bounds to hit the checkpoint, and then reload the save to load the next section. Using the same tricks to skip this section too, we finally make it out of chapter 1 and reload our save from the chapter select screen. This will become important later. Now that we're here in chapter 2, this would normally be where we enter the daycare, turn on all the generators, and fix Eclipse. Unfortunately, however, I was told that I wasn't allowed anywhere within 30 yards of a school zone. So instead, we're just going to have to hop this fence, mask warp back in bounds, and then mask warp again to get into the theatre. From here, we pull a Jumanji and get yet another reminder that it might be some time to lose some weight to start chapter 3. And after a full 2 minutes of completely unskippable cutscene, we're launched onto the catwalks, where Gregory tells us that in order to progress, we're going to need to activate all of the child nodes nearby so that we can ride the gondola into the staff area. Fun fact here is that the exit to this entire 3-minute long section is actually just to the side of us, and the doors stopping us don't actually have any collision. Unfortunately though, despite many hours of trying, it's currently deemed to be completely impossible to skip this area. And if anyone ends up proving me wrong, then I will make an entire short dedicated to simping for them. That is a promise. But we came here for a reason, and Greggy Poo is counting on us. So we're gonna have to do this section the normal way, grabbing all the child nodes with only a few minor skips and making it all the way back to the starting point. But now there's another problem. You remember how back in the intro of the game, we completely skipped picking up the Faz wrench? Well, without doing both the parent node and the conduit here, the game doesn't actually activate the trigger that lets you leave this area and continue with the game. And neither the node or the conduit can be interacted with without having the Faz wrench in your inventory. So, we're trapped. Or are we? You see, the checkpoint load system essentially functions as a way to load pre-made saves created by the devs. Because of that, when we reloaded from chapter at the start of chapter 2, we actually had the Faz wrench already placed in our inventory, allowing us to complete the nodes and hop on Monty's wild ride to start chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 is actually a pretty fun section. This is the area where we have the entity reaffirmed as a permanent obstacle for the rest of the game, face off against Chica, and get really comfortable with using the fuse boxes. Unfortunately, however, I actually forgot about all of this, because I haven't played through this section in 7 months. Because with just a little bit of parkour and a mask swap, we can completely skip this entire section, placing us straight into the backrooms. From here, we complete a couple of camera puzzles before emerging out into Chapter 5. Now, if you're playing on the game's release patch, there would actually be an easy trick you could pull here by simply taking the mask off at a certain point above these stairs to immediately skip to the end of this chapter. Unfortunately for us though, in the modern day version of this game, this has been patched out. Luckily for us though, it was the same patch that removed that trick that gave us mask warping. So, running up to these shelves and cosplaying as a child left alone in the supermarket for too long, we can mask warp up the wall, run across the roof, and drop down to reach the other side of the Glamrock Salon before heading down to face off against Monty. Now, the Monty fight isn't anything particularly difficult even in a normal playthrough, but in this speedrun, our paraplegic friend is just put through the ringer. You see, similarly to the cutscene at the start of the game, the trigger for Monty to spawn in and come swimming around for us is at the very bottom of a ladder. Unfortunately for Monty though, that means that by simply wedge jumping onto this toolbox and then parkouring onto the railings, we can completely skip the trigger that spawns him and complete the fight without any threat whatsoever. Rest in peace, you furry Joe Swanson. Navigating our way back into the main areas of the Pizzaplex, we wind up in Roxy Wasteway for Chapter 6, where we try and fail to get a hold of Gregory. We should probably go faster. Wedge jumping on this bin, we parkour across the top of these walls all the way to the other side of the level. Now here it's time to finally show off the final tech that we're going to be using for the rest of this game. To show you this properly though, I'm first going to need to explain how the mask works. You see, for every single level in Ruin, there's actually a completely identical version of the same map stored directly underneath the original. This second map is the VR one, stored below the normal world at a specific offset, with the mask acting as not much more than a simple teleporter, transporting you from one of these maps to the other. When putting the mask on, you are teleported down, and when you take it off, you are teleported up. But that leaves us with one question. What if we could somehow find a way to trick the game into thinking that we're in the normal world while we still have the mask on? Doing this would allow us to hold on to what would essentially be a super jump, easily allowing us to go out of bounds in any way that we want. Doing this though would be tricky. We would need to find some kind of area with special conditions that completely overwrite the mask's usual functionality. Luckily for us though, on the other side of this fence is some good old-fashioned vehicular manslaughter. Mask warping through the fence here bugs the game out because it's normally supposed to be taking the mask off and putting us in the real world to start this cutscene. But since we're currently putting the mask on, the only thing it actually does is put us back into the real world while keeping the mask firmly pressed against our face. This then allows us to use our super jump to skip the cutscene of us getting manhandled by a furry and drop down onto this platform to start loading in Chapter 7. Now, Chapter 7 is commonly seen as one of the hardest sections of the whole game. It takes place in Bonnie Bowl, and the whole gameplay of this section basically consists of running around and completing child nodes while trying to avoid the downright extreme amount of mini DJs roaming around the place. Normally this section can take well into the realms of 5 to 10 minutes, but for us, this whole section should be taking us about 20 seconds. As all we need to do is drop down from our little platform, run across the wall, and enter the cutscene at the end to start Chapter 8. From here, we once again restart from chapter, do half a mask warp before reloading from checkpoint, and then finish our mask warp and jump down onto the walls here to skip Phaser Blast and the fight with Ruined Freddy. Continuing along out of bounds, we hit the load trigger for the next section, drop down, and put our mask on in another spot that overwrites normal mask function, giving us yet another up warp that we're going to be using shortly. Heading through a small hole in the wall and jumping over some invisible walls, we officially start Chapter 9. We're in the end game now, boys. I can already smell him. Running through this section and using our up warp up against this wall, we are able to completely skip the cutscene of us showing Roxy the door, and simply walk across the wall before dropping down into the elevator to take us down to the very last segment of the game. And now with our mask disabled, chivalry in our hearts, and tier 3 subscriptions paid for, we set off to finally find our senpai and end this run once and for all. Getting out of the elevator, we immediately turn over to one of the walls, using 2 different wedge jumps to reach the top of the cave. From here, we jump across the ceiling to make our way on top of the crouching section. We then jump down onto the flooring of the cave before ducking down below it, and follow a specific route to make it on top of the afternoon room hallway. Jumping across the other room, we're now in range to drop down onto the ending room, where we can hop over the wall to the Mimic's hideout and start making our way through the cave system. And with all the things we've done to find Gregory up until this point flashing before our eyes, we reach the cardboard cutout of Freddy and put our mask on to finally reunite with our one true love and put this run to an end.